The sun bore down mercilessly on the dusty streets of Fort Defiance, a godforsaken outpost on the edge of Arizona territory where civilization ended and lawlessness began. Marshal Beckett Rourke stood outside the territorial courthouse, rolling a cigarette between his weathered fingers as he read the court order for the third time. The paper felt heavier than the Colt .45 strapped to his hip. One female prisoner, Clara Whitmore, to be transported to Cedar Falls for trial. The words were simple enough, but Beckett had been a lawman long enough to know that simple orders often led to complicated situations. Judge Morrison emerged from the courthouse, mopping his brow with a yellowed handkerchief.
"She's in the holding cell at the garrison. Marshal, they've been keeping her there since the cavalry brought her in from Tucson."
"What's her story?" Beckett asked, though he rarely concerned himself with the particulars of his prisoners. Guilty or innocent, his job was transportation, not judgment. Daughter of Edgar Whitmore, you've heard the name. No doubt, Eastern banking family. Had their fingers in half the silver mines from here to California before the whole enterprise collapsed. Morrison spat tobacco juice into the dirt. They say she embezzled thousands, maybe more, forged documents, phantom loans, the whole repertoire of financial chicanery. Beckett nodded, tucking the order into his vest pocket, another fallen aristocrat learning that money couldn't buy immunity in the territories. He'd transported dozens like her, though usually they were men, and usually they didn't warrant special orders from the territorial court. The garrison sat like a squat adobe beast at the northern edge of town, its walls pockmarked from Apache raids and weather alike. Sergeant McKenna met him at the gate, a grizzled veteran whose face bore the map of 20 years' frontier service.
"Come to collect our guest, Marshal?"
McKenna's smile held no warmth.
"She's been nothing but trouble. Won't eat, won't talk, just sits there like a damned statue."
"I don't need her to talk," Beckett replied.
"Just need her to travel."
The holding cells were little more than iron cages set into the fort's interior wall, designed for drunk soldiers rather than long-term imprisonment. The smell hit him first, unwashed bodies, fear sweat, and the peculiar mustiness of hope abandoned. She sat on the narrow wooden bench in the furthest cell, her back straight despite the wilting heat. Even in the dim light filtering through barred windows, Beckett could see she'd once been something refined. Her dress, though torn and dust-stained, was made of deep burgundy velvet, the kind of fabric that had no business in Arizona territory. Dark hair that had likely once been elaborately styled now hung in tangled waves past her shoulders. "Miss Whitmore." He kept his voice neutral, professional. "I'm Marshal Rourke. I'll be escorting you to Cedar Falls." She turned then, and Beckett found himself momentarily caught by her eyes. They were gray, like storm clouds over the desert, and utterly devoid of the fear he'd grown accustomed to seeing in prisoners. Instead, there was something else, a coldness that seemed at odds with the fever-bright intensity lurking beneath. "Marshal." Her voice was hoarse from disuse, but still carried traces of Eastern education. "How civilized. They're sending me to my death with an escort. You'll get a fair trial in Cedar Falls." The laugh that escaped her was bitter as alkali water. "Fair. Yes, I'm sure it will be remarkably fair." She stood, moving with a grace that seemed impossible after what must have been days in that cell. "When do we leave?" "Dawn. It's a 5-day journey if the weather holds. 5 days." She moved closer to the bars, and Beckett caught the scent of lavender water fighting a losing battle against dust and desperation. "Tell me, Marshal, do you enjoy your work? Delivering the condemned like parcels?" "I uphold the law. Miss Whitmore. Nothing more, nothing less." "The law." She gripped the bars, knuckles white beneath the dirt. "Do you know what the law did to my father? Do you know what your precious law protects in this territory?" Beckett had heard it all before. The protestations of innocence, the claims of conspiracy, the desperate bargaining of the guilty. He turned to leave. "I'll send someone with water and a clean dress if we can find one. We leave at first light. Marshal." Her voice stopped him at the door. "They're going to kill me. You know, not the court,
Not officially, but I'll never make it to trial. That's why you have me, Miss Whitmore. My job is to get you there alive. Your job." The coldness crept back into her voice. "Yes, how comforting." That evening, Beckett made his preparations with the mechanical precision of long practice. He inspected the prison wagon, a converted freight hauler with iron bars welded over the windows and a reinforced door that locked from the outside. The wheels needed grease, and one of the axles showed signs of wear, but it would hold for 5 days. His horses, Caesar and Brutus, were sturdy Mustangs who'd made the journey countless times. He loaded supplies methodically: water barrels, hardtack, dried beef, ammunition for his rifle and sidearm, rope, medical supplies, and the small luxuries that made the desert crossings bearable: coffee, tobacco, a flask of whiskey for the cold desert nights. The sun was setting, painting the mountains crimson. When Deputy Hollis approached, the younger man looked nervous, fidgeting with his gun belt. "Marshal, there's been talk in the saloons about the Whitmore woman." Beckett continued checking his rifle. "There's always talk. This is different." "There's men asking about your route, about when you're leaving. Strangers, not locals." "How many?" "3, maybe 4. Well armed. They're trying to be casual about it, but—" Hollis shrugged. Beckett considered this. It wasn't unusual for prisoners with money to have friends interested in their welfare or their silence. "Thank you, Deputy. I'll keep it in mind." That night, Beckett barely slept. It wasn't worry that kept him awake. He'd faced worse odds than a few hired guns. Rather, it was the woman's eyes, that strange mixture of ice and fire, and her certainty that she wouldn't survive the journey. Most prisoners begged, pleaded, tried to bargain. Clara Whitmore had simply stated her death as fact. Dawn came like a reluctant witness, spreading weak light across the desert. Beckett had the wagon ready, horses hitched, supplies secured. McKenna brought the prisoner out in shackles, though she walked with her head high, as if the chains were merely an inconvenient fashion accessory. She'd managed to clean herself somewhat, and someone had found her a plain cotton dress that, while too large, was at least intact. Her hair was pulled back in a simple braid, without the grime. Beckett could see she was younger than he'd initially thought, perhaps 25, certainly no more than 30. "The shackles stay on until we're clear of town," he informed her as McKenna helped her into the wagon. "Of course they do." She settled onto the hard bench, arranging her skirts with practiced dignity. "Tell me, Marshal, have you ever transported a woman before?" "A few. How many made it to trial?" Beckett didn't answer, simply closed and locked the wagon door. He climbed onto the driver's bench, released the brake, and urged the horses forward. The wagon lurched into motion, wheels creaking despite the fresh grease. They passed through Fort Defiance as the town was waking. Shopkeepers sweeping their stoops paused to stare. A few women heading to early morning mass crossed themselves. Children ran alongside for a few yards before their mothers called them back. At the town's edge, Beckett stopped at the last well to top off the water barrels. As he worked the pump, he noticed 3 riders watching from the shadow of the livery stable. They made no move to approach, but he memorized their faces, hard men with the look of those who killed for wages rather than conviction. "We have company." Clara's voice drifted through the bars. "I see them. They'll wait until we're in the desert. Harder to explain bodies out there." Beckett climbed back onto the bench. "Let me worry about that. Miss Whitmore." "Clara." The correction was soft. "If you're going to deliver me to my death, you might as well use my given name." He flicked the reins, and the wagon rolled forward into the vast expanse of red rock and scorching sand that stretched between Fort Defiance and Cedar Falls. Behind them, the 3 riders waited a respectable interval before following. The first day's journey would take them through relatively populated territory, scattered ranches, a few mining camps, even a way station where they could water the horses. It was the nights that would be dangerous, when the darkness provided cover for those who preferred their business unwitnessed. As the sun climbed higher, Beckett found himself oddly aware of the woman in the cage behind him. She hadn't spoken since they'd left town, hadn't complained about the jarring ride or the growing heat. When he glanced back through the small window that allowed him to monitor his prisoner, she sat perfectly still, eyes closed, as if she were somewhere else entirely. "There's water back there," he called, drinking cups hanging on the side. "Thank you." She didn't open her eyes. They rode in silence through the morning, the only sounds the creak of wheels, the steady clop of hooves, and the occasional cry of a hawk circling overhead. The landscape rolled past in waves of sage and mesquite, punctuated by towering saguaro cacti that stood like ancient sentinels. It was nearly noon when she spoke again. "Do you know why they call it Cedar Falls?" "Because there's cedars and a waterfall," Beckett replied shortly. "There were." Her voice carried a strange wistfulness. "My father took me there once, when I was 16. He was negotiating the purchase of the Fortuna mine. The waterfall had dried to a trickle, and most of the cedars were dying, but the name remained, like a promise of something that no longer existed. Your father took you on business trips. He was grooming me to take over. Before..." She trailed off. "Before the money ran out? Before he discovered that some losses can't be calculated in ledgers?" Beckett wanted to ask what she meant, but maintaining professional distance was safer. He'd transport her, keep her alive, deliver her to the authorities in Cedar Falls. What happened after that wasn't his concern. The sun reached its zenith, and the heat became a living thing, pressing down on them like a flat iron. Beckett pulled his hat lower, grateful for the slight breeze created by their movement. Behind him, Clara had finally taken his advice about the water. They reached Skeleton Ridge by mid-afternoon, a series of bone-white rock formations that marked the halfway point of the first day's journey. Beckett allowed himself a moment's satisfaction. They were making good time, and their followers were maintaining their distance. Perhaps this would be just another routine transport after all. He should have known better than to tempt fate in the territory. As they rounded a particularly narrow bend between two towering rocks, a figure stepped into the road ahead. Not one of their followers. This was a different kind of trouble. An Apache warrior, painted for war, rifle trained on Beckett's chest. More appeared from behind rocks, at least a dozen, moving with the fluid grace of men born to this landscape. Beckett slowly raised his hands, mind racing through possibilities. The lead warrior approached, and Beckett recognized him. Joseph Crow Dog, one of the reservation jumpers the Army had been half-heartedly pursuing for months. His band survived by raiding supply wagons and the occasional isolated ranch. "Marshal." Crow Dog's English was accented but clear. "You carry something valuable. Just a prisoner. Nothing worth your time." Crow Dog smiled, the expression somehow more unsettling than a scowl would have been. "The woman. Yes, but also guns, supplies, horses." He gestured to his men. "We need these things. You know what attacking a federal marshal means. The Army will... The Army chases ghosts in the mountains while we walk freely." Crow Dog moved closer. "But perhaps we make trade. You leave wagon, take woman, walk to next town. Everyone lives..." From the wagon came Clara's voice, steady and clear. "I have money, hidden in Tucson, more than you'd get from selling these supplies." Crow Dog's attention shifted to the wagon. "The banker's daughter speaks. How much money?" 20,000 in gold certificates, hidden where only I can find them." Beckett knew she was lying, had to be lying, but Crow Dog looked intrigued. "And you would trade this for your life?" "For all our lives, the Marshals included." The Apache leader considered this, then shook his head. "Gold certificates are paper. Paper burns. Horses and guns feed my people now." He turned back to Beckett. "You choose, Marshal. Walk away or die with your duty." Beckett's hand inched toward his sidearm. "You know I can't do that." "Yes." Crow Dog sounded almost sad. "I know." The moment stretched taut as a bowstring. Beckett calculated angles. Distances. Chances. He might get Crow Dog. Maybe one or two others before they cut him down. Clara would die anyway, either here or at the hands of whoever had hired those men following them. Then, from the rocks behind, came the crack of a rifle. One of Crow Dog's men spun and fell. More shots followed. Their pursuers had chosen this moment to make their move, not realizing they were attacking Apache warriors instead of a lone marshal. In the chaos that followed, Beckett acted on instinct. He dove from the wagon, rolled behind a boulder as bullets whined overhead. The Apache scattered, returning fire at their unseen attackers. For the moment, Beckett and his prisoner were forgotten in the larger battle. He worked his way back to the wagon, staying low. Clara pressed against the bars. "The keys," she hissed. "Let me out." "Stay down," he ordered, then grabbed his rifle from the wagon boot. The crossfire was intensifying. He could see muzzle flashes from both sides now, Apache and hired guns trying to kill each other while he and Clara huddled in the middle. A figure broke from cover, one of the men from town, trying to reach the wagon. Beckett shot him twice, watched him fall. Another came from the opposite direction. Clara screamed a warning, and Beckett spun, firing from the hip. The man stumbled but kept coming. Beckett's second shot dropped him 10 feet from the wagon. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the shooting stopped. Beckett counted 3 dead Apache, 2 dead gunmen. Crow Dog and his surviving men had melted back into the landscape with their wounded. If any of the hired guns survived, they'd retreated as well. "Marshal?" Clara's voice was steady, but he could see her hands shaking as they gripped the bars. "I'm here. Are you hurt?" "No, but Marshal..." She pointed. He turned to see the third gunman from town, wounded but walking, emerging from the rocks. The man held his rifle loosely, blood spreading across his shirt from a wound in his side. "Nothing personal, Marshal," the man called. "But the lady's gotta go. You can walk away. This ain't your fight." "I'm afraid it is." Beckett kept his rifle trained on the man. "Then you're a fool." The gunman raised his weapon. 2 shots cracked almost simultaneously. The gunman jerked, fell backward, didn't move again. Beckett felt the burn across his ribs where the man's bullet had grazed him. Knew it could have been much worse. "Marshal!" Clara's voice held an edge of panic now. "You're bleeding. It's nothing." He pressed a hand to his side. Felt the warm wetness. Not deep, but it would need tending. "We need to move. Crow Dog might circle back." He climbed onto the wagon, grimacing at the pull on his wound, and urged the nervous horses forward. They needed to clear the ridge, find somewhere defensible to stop and deal with injuries. The way station was still hours ahead. Behind them, the dead lay where they'd fallen, already attracting the attention of circling vultures. The desert would claim them soon enough, leaving only bones to mark where duty and greed had intersected in blood. As they rolled forward, Beckett heard Clara moving in the wagon, then felt something soft pressed against the bars near his back. A piece of her petticoat, torn and folded. "For the bleeding," she said quietly. He reached back, took the makeshift bandage. "Thank you. They'll send more. You know, my father's partners. They can't afford to let me testify. Then we'll deal with them too." "Why?" The question held genuine puzzlement. "You could have traded me to Crow Dog. You could have walked away just now. Why die for someone you don't even know?" Beckett pressed the cloth against his wound, thought about the question. "Because I gave my word to the court. Because without the law, we're just animals in the desert, tearing each other apart for scraps. The law." That bitter laugh again. "The same law that let my father destroy lives for profit, that protects the powerful while hanging the desperate. It's not perfect, but it's what we have." They rode in silence after that. 2 strangers bound by circumstance and duty, rolling through a landscape that cared nothing for either law or justice. Ahead lay 4 more days of desert, and the certainty that this was only the beginning. The sun was already declining, painting their shadows long across the sand. Soon, Beckett would need to find a place to camp, tend his wound, and prepare for whatever the night might bring. But for now, he drove on. The woman in the cage behind him no longer just a prisoner to be transported, but a puzzle he was beginning to suspect he needed to solve if either of them hoped to see Cedar Falls alive. The Colorado River appeared before them like a brown serpent, twisting through the canyon floor far below. 2 days had passed since the ambush at Skeleton Ridge, and Beckett's wound had settled into a dull ache that flared with each jolt of the wagon. The makeshift bandages Clara had torn from her petticoat were stained rust brown with dried blood. "There's supposed to be a ferry crossing," Clara said, peering through the bars at the winding trail that led down to the river. At least, there was 3 years ago. Beckett studied the descent with a practiced eye. The path was narrow, carved by countless hooves and wagon wheels, switching back and forth across the cliff face. One wrong move would send them tumbling into the gorge. "Ferry's still there," he confirmed, spotting the flat-bottomed boat tied at the river's edge. "Question is whether old Pete's still running it, or if someone less friendly has taken over." He'd been watching their back trail all morning, but there'd been no sign of pursuit since the ridge. That worried him more than outright attack would have. Men who wanted Clara dead wouldn't simply give up. The descent took 2 hours. Beckett walked beside the wagon, guiding the horses, ready to throw his weight against the brake if the wheels started sliding. Clara remained silent, gripping the bench as the wagon tilted at precarious angles. The ferry landing was little more than a wide spot in the trail. With a ramshackle cabin perched above the high-water mark, smoke drifted from the chimney, and a figure emerged as they approached. Not old Pete, but a younger man with suspicious eyes and a shotgun cradled in his arms. "That's close enough," the man called when they were 50 yards out. "State your business." "You, Marshal, transporting a prisoner to Cedar Falls. We need passage across." The ferryman spat tobacco juice into the dust. "Badge don't mean much out here. Marshal, crossing's $5 a head, 10 for the wagon and horses." "Since when? Pete never charged more than $2 total." "Pete's dead. Fever took him last winter. I'm running things now." The man's smile was unpleasant. "Take it or leave it. Next crossing 60 miles downstream." Beckett calculated quickly. 60 miles would add 2 days to their journey. 2 days in the open with limited water. He reached for his money pouch. $25. Then, in advance. As Beckett counted out the coins, he noticed movement in the cabin window. At least one more person inside, maybe 2. His instincts prickled, but they needed a cross. The ferry was barely large enough for the wagon. Beckett had to unhitch the horses and lead them on separately. The ferryman operated the rope pulley system that pulled them across, muscles straining against the current. Midway across, the river running fast and brown beneath them, the ferryman paused. "Heard there was some trouble up at Skeleton Ridge. Apache and some others. News travels fast out here," Beckett said neutrally. "Sure does. Also heard there might be a reward for certain prisoners not reaching their destination." Beckett's hand moved to his sidearm. "You heard wrong. Maybe." The ferryman resumed pulling, but his eyes kept flicking between Beckett and the wagon. Then again, maybe not. Lot of money floating around for a simple fraud case. They reached the far bank without incident, but Beckett kept his guard up as he rehitched the horses. Clara had remained silent throughout the crossing, but he could feel her tension. As they pulled away from the landing, she finally spoke. "He's going to signal someone." "I know." Beckett glanced back to see the ferryman already heading for his cabin. "But we're across, and that's what matters." The trail climbed steeply from the river, winding through layers of red and yellow sandstone. The horses labored in the heat, foam flecking their flanks. Beckett stopped frequently to rest them, using the pauses to scan the landscape for threats. It was during one such stop, as he watered the horses from his canteen, that Clara said, "Marshal, I need to ask you something." "Ask." "If I don't make it to Cedar Falls." "You will." "But if I don't?" Her voice was steady, matter of fact. "There's a lawyer in Tucson, James Morrison. He has documents, evidence about what my father was really doing. Promise me you'll see he gets them to the right authorities." Beckett turned to look at her through the bars. In the harsh afternoon light, he could see the fine lines around her eyes, the determined set of her jaw. What kind of evidence? The kind that proves I wasn't embezzling, I was trying to stop it. She met his gaze directly. My father was using the bank to funnel money to the Comancheros, financing their raids in exchange for a share of the plunder. When I tried to expose it, he had me framed. That's a serious accusation. It's the truth. And there are people in Cedar Falls who profited from it. People who need me silenced. She leaned back against the wagon's wall. So, you see, Marshal, delivering me to trial might not be the noble act you think it is. Beckett considered her words as they resumed traveling. He'd transported liars before, men and women who spun elaborate tales of innocence. But something in Clara's voice, in the resignation rather than desperation, rang true. The sun was past its zenith when Clara suddenly cried out. Beckett turned to see her gripping her ankle, face twisted in pain. "What is it?" "Something's wrong. I think," she gasped. "I think I've injured my ankle. It happened when the wagon tilted on that last grade." He stopped the wagon, climbed down to unlock the door. It was the first time he'd opened it since Fort Defiance. Clara sat on the bench, her left foot held gingerly off the floor. "Let me see." He entered the cramped space, knelt beside her. Through her worn boot, he could already see swelling. "We need to get this off." She nodded, biting her lip as he carefully unlaced the boot. Her ankle was indeed swollen, already purpling with bruises. "Not broken, I think, but badly twisted." He looked up at her. "There's a town about 5 miles ahead. Sage Creek, little more than a few buildings, but they might have a doctor." "No." Her hand caught his arm. "Please, the fewer people who see us, the better. You need this properly tended." "Then you do it." Her gray eyes held his. "You must have dealt with injuries before." He had, of course. In 20 years of wearing a badge, he'd set bones, stitched wounds, dug out bullets. But there was something different about kneeling in that close space, carefully wrapping her ankle while she gripped the bench, trying not to show how much it hurt. "There." He tied off the bandage. "Keep it elevated. I'll stop early tonight. Make a proper camp where you can rest." "Thank you." Her voice was soft. As he turned to leave, she added, "Beckett?" It was the first time she'd used his given name. He paused. "I'm sorry for all of this. You're a good man. Trying to do your duty. You don't deserve to die for my father's sins." "Nobody's dying," he said gruffly. But something had shifted between them in that moment. The barrier of Marshal and prisoner had cracked, revealing two people caught in circumstances beyond their control. They reached Sage Creek as the sun touched the western mountains. The town was as small as Beckett remembered. A general store, a cantina, a blacksmith, and a few adobe houses scattered along the single street. He pulled up outside the store. "Wait here," he told Clara, then added more gently, "Rest that ankle." The store was dim and cluttered, shelves stocked with everything from ammunition to ladies' tonics. The proprietor, a thin woman with sharp eyes, watched him select supplies, fresh bandages, laudanum for pain, some canned peaches he thought Clara might eat. "Traveling alone, Marshal?" the woman asked as she tallied his purchases. "Transporting a prisoner. Dangerous work, especially with all the trouble lately." She leaned closer, voice dropping. "2 men came through this morning, asking about a marshal with a wagon. Said they were friends of yours, but they didn't look friendly to me." Beckett paid for his goods. "Which way did they head?" "North, toward the old mining camps. But men like that, they double back easy enough." Outside, he found Clara standing beside the wagon, testing her weight on the injured ankle. She'd somehow gotten out despite the locked door. "How?" She held up a hairpin, smiled slightly. "Did you think I'd spent all that time in the cage without exploring options? I stayed because I chose to, not because I had to." The admission should have angered him. Instead, he found himself almost admiring her resourcefulness. "Get back in. We're not staying here." "But you said we'd camp early." Changed my mind. There's an old way station about 10 miles north, abandoned last year when the stage line changed routes. We'll hole up there." She climbed back into the wagon without argument, and he noticed she was trying not to limp. He locked the door, then handed the supplies through the bars. "For your ankle, the laudanum will help with the pain. And the peaches. Thought you might be tired of hardtack and jerky." Something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or gratitude. "Thank you." They left Sage Creek as shadows lengthened across the desert. Beckett pushed the horses harder than he liked, wanting distance between them and anyone who might be following. The abandoned way station sat in a box canyon, protected on 3 sides by sheer rock walls. The building itself was solid adobe, built to withstand Apache raids. As he unhitched the horses in the gathering dusk, Beckett made his decision. "You'll sleep inside tonight. That ankle needs proper rest." "But—" No arguments. He unlocked the wagon, helped her down. She leaned on him more than she probably wanted to, her body warm against his side. The station's main room was dusty but intact, with a fireplace and even some furniture left behind. Beckett settled Clara in a chair, then went about securing the building, checking windows, barring the door, positioning supplies where they could reach them quickly. "You're expecting trouble," she observed. "Always do. Sometimes I'm disappointed." He built a small fire, more for light than warmth. The desert nights were cold, but smoke could be seen for miles. They ate in companionable silence, canned beans, dried biscuit, and the peaches, which Clara savored like fine wine. Afterward, she tested her ankle again, wincing. "Let me check the bandage." He knelt beside her chair, carefully unwrapped her ankle. The swelling had worsened, but the bone seemed intact. As he rewrapped it, he was acutely aware of her watching him. "You have gentle hands," she said, "unexpected in a man who lives by violence. I live by the law. Violence is just sometimes necessary." "Is that what you tell yourself?" There was no mockery in her voice, only curiosity. "That it's all for justice. What would you have me tell myself?" She was quiet for a moment. "I used to believe in justice, before I learned it could be bought and sold like everything else. Not all of it. Not everyone." "No?" She leaned forward. "Then why are you really here, Beckett? Why risk your life for a prisoner you don't know? For a law that protects the guilty as often as the innocent?" He finished the bandage, sat back on his heels. The firelight played across her face, softening the hard edges grief and betrayal had carved there. "Because if I don't, who will? Because somewhere between the corrupt judges and bought lawmen, someone has to stand for what's right. Even if it gets you killed? Especially then." She reached out, her fingers brushing his cheek. "You're either the noblest fool I've ever met, or the most foolish noble." He caught her hand, meaning to move it away. Instead, he found himself holding it, feeling the calluses that suggested this Eastern belle had learned harder work than embroidery. "Clara, I know." She withdrew her hand. "I'm your prisoner. You're my jailer. Nothing changes that." But something had changed. There in the flickering firelight, the boundary between duty and desire had blurred, and they both knew it. Later, Beckett spread blankets near the fire for her, then took up position by the window. Clara settled painfully onto the makeshift bed, favoring her ankle. "You should sleep," she said. "I could keep watch for a while." "With what? Your hairpin?" "I might surprise you." "You already have." In the darkness, he heard her shift, heard the soft intake of breath that might have been pain or something else. "Beckett, what happens when we reach Cedar Falls?" "You stand trial. I testify that I delivered you safely. After that, it's up to the judge and jury. And if they find me guilty..." He didn't answer. They both knew what happened to embezzlers who'd stolen thousands. The court would be merciful. Prison. Not hanging. But for someone like Clara, prison might be worse. "Will you stay?" Her voice was very small. "For the trial?" "If you want me to. I think I would like that, to have one honest face in the courtroom." He maintained his vigil as her breathing deepened into sleep. Outside, Coyotes called to each other across the canyon. The fire burned low, casting dancing shadows on the walls. 3 more days to Cedar Falls. 3 more days to keep her safe. To deliver her to a justice system they both knew was flawed. 3 more days before duty and growing attachment collided with finality. Beckett checked his weapons, tested the door's bar one more time, then settled in to watch the night. Whatever came with dawn, he would face it. But for now, in this abandoned shelter at the edge of civilization, 2 unlikely souls had found a moment's peace in each other's company. The desert wind moaned through gaps in the adobe, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. Somewhere in the darkness, danger gathered its forces for another attempt, but inside, for these few hours, Marshal and prisoner had become simply Beckett and Clara, 2 people discovering that sometimes the heart's law superseded all others. The mountain trail had turned treacherous by late afternoon, nothing more than a narrow ledge carved into sheer rock face. Below, the canyon yawned like an open grave, while above, loose scree threatened to cascade down at the slightest disturbance. Beckett walked beside the wagon, one hand on Caesar's bridle, guiding the nervous horses step by careful step. Thunder rolled across the peaks, and the smell of rain grew stronger. Clara pressed her face against the bars, watching the storm clouds mass above them. "There's a cave about a mile ahead," Beckett said, remembering from previous journeys. "If we can reach it before—" The first shots came from above, muzzle flashes visible among the rocks. Beckett yanked the horses toward the cliff face as bullets sparked off stone inches from his head. More gunfire erupted from positions he couldn't see. They'd walked into a carefully planned ambush. "Get down!" he shouted to Clara, though she'd already thrown herself flat on the wagon floor. The horses screamed and plunged, threatening to send the wagon over the edge. Beckett fought to control them while drawing his Colt, firing blindly upward to force the attackers to take cover. A figure emerged from behind a boulder ahead, masked, rifle raised. Beckett shot him twice, watched him tumble into the void. But more were coming, rappelling down the cliff face like spiders. "Marshal!" Clara's warning came too late. A man dropped onto the wagon's roof, reaching for the door lock. Beckett spun, fired upward through the wooden roof. The attacker rolled off, clutching his chest. But the horses, maddened by gunfire and the scent of blood, had reached their limit. Caesar reared, hooves striking air, while Brutus tried to back away from the chaos. The wagon tilted dangerously toward the precipice. "Jump!" Beckett commanded, firing the lock off the wagon door. "Now!" Clara didn't hesitate. She burst from the wagon just as the rear wheel slipped off the edge. Beckett caught her, pulled her against the cliff face as the wagon teetered, balanced on the brink. The attackers pressed their advantage, bullets chipping stone all around them. Beckett emptied his Colt, reload, kept firing, but they were pinned down, nowhere to run on the narrow ledge. Then the storm broke. Rain came in sheets, instant and torrential. Thunder crashed directly overhead, so loud it drowned out the gunfire. Lightning turned the world white, then black. In the chaos, Beckett grabbed Clara's hand. "The cave! Run!" They sprinted along the ledge, using the storm as cover. Behind them, the wagon finally lost its battle with gravity, taking both horses with it into the canyon. The crash was lost in thunder. The cave mouth appeared through the rain, a dark sanctuary in the rock. They dove inside just as bullets sparked where they'd been standing. Beckett pushed Clara deeper into the cave, then took position at the entrance, rifle ready. But the storm had become their ally. No one could pursue in this deluge, not on that narrow ledge with lightning striking the peaks. He could see shapes moving in the rain, but they were falling back, seeking their own shelter. "They'll wait," Clara gasped, soaked and shivering. "Wait for the storm to pass. Let them." Beckett's own breath came hard. "We're alive. That's what matters." The cave extended back into darkness, but the front chamber was large enough to move around in. Beckett gathered what dry wood he could find near the entrance, previous travelers having left small stockpiles. Soon he had a fire going, smoke drawing up through natural vents in the rock. In the firelight, he got his first good look at Clara since the attack. Her dress was torn, blood seeping from numerous cuts where she'd scraped against stone. Her ankle, already injured, had been worsened by their flight. "You're hurt." He moved toward her. "So are you." She pointed to his shoulder, where a bullet had grazed deep enough to need attention. They tended each other's wounds in silence, the intimacy of it made necessary by circumstance. Clara's hands were steady as she cleaned his shoulder, though he could feel her trembling. "I'm sorry about Caesar and Brutus," she said quietly. "They were good horses." They were. The loss hit him harder than he'd expected. Those horses had carried him through 100 dangerous miles. "What do we do now? We're on foot. No supplies. Still 2 days from Cedar Falls. We survive tonight. Tomorrow we figure out the rest." The storm raged on, turning the cave entrance into a waterfall. They huddled near the fire, sharing what little warmth it provided. Clara had stopped shivering, but she sat close to him, closer than propriety would normally allow. "They were different this time," she observed. "More professional, not hired guns from the territory. No, these were brought in special." Beckett stared into the flames. "Someone wants you dead very badly. My father's partner." "Jacob Thornton." She pulled her knees to her chest, looking suddenly young. "He controls half the territory's judges, owns pieces of every major business from here to California. If I testify, his empire falls, along with a dozen others. They've built their fortunes on blood and betrayal. My father," her voice caught. "My father was supposed to be different. He taught me about honor, about building something clean. Then I discovered the ledgers, learned where the money really came from." "Is that when you tried to expose him?" "I went to him first, begged him to stop, to make amends." She laughed bitterly. "He had me arrested the next morning, his own daughter, accused of embezzling funds I'd tried to return to their rightful owners." Lightning illuminated the cave entrance, showing rain still falling in sheets. In the brief light, Beckett saw tears on Clara's face. "You did the right thing," he said. "Did I? My father's dead. I'm branded a criminal, and Thornton continues his bloody work. What did righteousness accomplish?" He moved closer, drawn by an impulse he didn't fully understand. "It brought you here. The truth will come out." "Will it?" She turned to face him fully. "When Thornton owns the judge, when half the jury profits from his schemes, then we make sure you don't stand trial in Cedar Falls." The word surprised him as much as her. He hadn't realized he'd been thinking it, but now the plan formed rapidly. "There's a federal judge in Prescott, Judge Carter. He can't be bought. If we can reach him, that's 3 days past Cedar Falls. You'd be violating your orders." "My orders were to deliver you for trial. They didn't specify which court." Hope flickered in her eyes, then died. "We're on foot, wounded, with killers on our trail. We'll never make Prescott." "Have faith." "In what? In justice? In God?" Her voice turned fierce. "Or in you, Beckett Rourke?" The question hung between them like the lightning that split the sky. He could see her pulse fluttering at her throat, could smell lavender and rain and something essentially Clara beneath it all. "In us," he said quietly. "In the chance that 2 people can stand against the darkness and win." She kissed him then. It wasn't gentle or tentative. It was desperate, hungry, full of fear and longing and the knowledge that tomorrow might never come. Her hands tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, and he responded with equal fervor. All thoughts of duty and propriety burned away by her touch. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, she whispered, "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have." He silenced her with another kiss, softer this time, tasting rain on her lips. "No apologies, not tonight." They made a bed of their combined coats near the fire. What followed was wordless, inevitable. 2 souls seeking comfort in the face of death. In the cave's shelter, with the storm raging outside, they found in each other a refuge from the violence that pursued them. Afterward, they lay entwined, Clara's head on his chest, his arms around her as if he could shield her from the world through will alone. "Beckett?" Her voice was drowsy, content in a way he hadn't heard before. If we don't make it, if they catch us tomorrow, they won't. But if they do," she lifted her head to look at him. "I want you to know this wasn't. I don't give myself lightly. You matter to me." He stroked her still damp hair. "You matter to me too, more than I have words for." "Then promise me something. If I fall, you keep going. Get to Prescott. Tell Judge Carter everything. Don't let Thornton win. We'll get there together. Promise me." He was quiet for a long moment, listening to the storm beginning to slacken outside. "I promise, but it won't come to that." They dozed fitfully, taking turns keeping watch. Near dawn, the rain finally stopped, leaving a world washed clean and dangerous. Beckett stood at the cave entrance, studying the terrain. "They'll be moving soon," Clara said, joining him. She'd tried to repair her dress, but it remained tattered. In the morning light, she looked like what she was, a woman who'd survived violence through sheer determination. "There's a mining camp about 5 miles east," Beckett said. "Abandoned, but there might be supplies, maybe even horses, and if it's watched, then we go through them." He checked his weapons, rifle, Colt, the knife in his boot. Not much against professional killers, but it would have to do. They left the cave as the sun crested the mountains, painting the wet rocks gold and crimson. The ledge was slick with rain, treacherous underfoot. Where the wagon had gone over, gouges in the stone marked its passing. Clara limped badly, her ankle unable to bear full weight. Beckett fashioned a walking stick from a dead juniper branch, but progress was slow. Every shadow could hide a rifleman. Every boulder could shelter death. They'd gone perhaps 2 miles when he heard it, horses approaching from behind. He pulled Clara behind an outcropping, rifle ready. 3 riders appeared, moving cautiously along the trail. Beckett recognized none of them, new players in Thornton's game. They stopped near where the ambush had occurred, studying the ground. "Trail goes this way. One called, on foot, one injured, can't be far." Beckett weighed their options. The riders would catch them soon on this narrow trail. Better to choose the ground for battle. "Can you climb?" he whispered to Clara. She nodded, though he could see the pain it would cost her. They scrambled up a steep grade to a cluster of boulders that commanded the trail below. Beckett positioned Clara behind solid cover, then settled in to wait. The riders came slowly, watchfully. Professional manhunters who knew their business, but the high ground was everything in a fight like this. Beckett let them get close, then opened fire. His first shot took the lead rider out of the saddle. The other 2 scattered, seeking cover, returning fire that sparked off the rocks. "McKenna, that you up there?" one shouted. "This ain't personal. Marshal, just business. Give us the woman and you walk away." Beckett's answer was another shot that sent the speaker diving for better cover. A fierce exchange followed, bullets whining through the air like angry hornets. Then Clara screamed. He turned to see a 4th man who'd circled around, coming up the slope behind them. The attacker had a bead on Beckett, finger tightening on the trigger. Clara shot him with Beckett's spare revolver he hadn't even known she'd taken. The man staggered, fired wild, then tumbled down the slope, but the distraction had cost them. The 2 remaining gunmen were advancing, using covering fire to pin them down. Beckett was down to his last few rounds. That's when he heard it. Horses approaching from the east. Many horses moving fast. Either reinforcements for their attackers, or a squad of cavalry burst around the bend. Blue uniforms bright in the morning sun. The gunmen, caught in the open, tried to flee. They didn't make it far. As the dust settled, a young lieutenant dismounted and climbed to their position. "Marshal Rourke, we've been looking for you. Got word about the trouble at Skeleton Ridge. Figured you might need assistance." Beckett had never been happier to see the army. "Your timing is excellent." "Lieutenant." "Sir, we've got orders to escort you and your prisoner to Cedar Falls." "Change of plans." "Lieutenant." Beckett helped Clara to her feet. "We're going to Prescott, federal jurisdiction." The lieutenant looked uncertain. "That's not what our orders—" "Son," Beckett interrupted, "I've got a wounded woman here who's been targeted by hired killers 3 times in 5 days. There's corruption in Cedar Falls that goes all the way to the courthouse. Now, you can help me get her to a fair trial, or you can explain to your commanding officer why you let assassins finish what they started." The young officer looked at Clara, took in her injuries and exhaustion, and made his decision. "Prescott it is. Marshal, we'll get you there safely." As soldiers helped Clara onto a spare horse, she caught Beckett's hand. "Thank you," she said simply, but her eyes said so much more. They rode east into the rising sun, the cavalry forming a protective circle around them. 3 days to Prescott, 3 days to safety and justice. But for the first time since leaving Fort Defiance, Beckett believed they might actually make it. The storm had passed, leaving the desert refreshed and gleaming. And somewhere in a cave in the mountains, the memory of 2 people finding solace in each other remained, as permanent as the ancient stone itself. The cavalry escort had departed that morning, Lieutenant Morrison reluctantly obeying orders to return to Fort Buchanan. Beckett watched the blue uniforms disappear into the desert heat, knowing he and Clara were alone again. They'd made camp at Willow Springs, still a day's ride from Prescott, but the relative safety of the past 2 days had given them both time to think. Clara sat by the small fire, her injured ankle propped on a saddle. The soldiers had provided them with horses and supplies, even a proper dress to replace her tattered clothing. But the haunted look had returned to her eyes. "Tell me about your father," Beckett said, settling beside her with 2 cups of coffee. "Not the banker, the man who raised you." She accepted the coffee gratefully, staring into its dark surface. "He was brilliant. Could calculate compound interest in his head faster than most men could on paper. He'd take me to the bank when I was small, let me sit on his desk while he worked. I thought he was the most important man in the world." "When did it change?" "When Mother died." Clara's voice grew distant. "Consumption took her slowly. Father spent everything trying to save her. Brought in specialists from Boston. Tried every cure. Nothing worked. After she passed, something in him broke. He said the world had taken the only pure thing in his life. So purity no longer mattered." That's when Thornton approached him? They'd known each other since the war. Thornton had connections throughout the territory, mining operations that needed financing, land deals that required creative bookkeeping. Father had the respectability and financial expertise Thornton lacked. She set down her cup, pulled a worn leather journal from her pack, one of the few possessions she'd managed to keep. "I started documenting everything 2 years ago. Names, dates, amounts, weapons shipments to the Comancheros, mining claims stolen through forged documents, even murder, when someone stood in their way." Beckett examined the journal, seeing page after page of careful notation in Clara's precise handwriting. "This is evidence enough to hang them all. If anyone will listen, Thornton has judges, sheriffs, even territorial legislators in his pocket. Why do you think they were so eager to silence me? Judge Carter will listen. He's fair, honest. Like you." She turned to him with a sad smile. "One honest man in a sea of corruption. What difference can that make? It has to make a difference. Otherwise, what's the point of any of it?" She was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Do you ever wonder what your life might have been if you'd chosen differently? Sometimes, might have been a rancher, had a family, lived quiet." He looked at her. "But then I wouldn't have been on that road from Fort Defiance. Wouldn't have met you. And that matters more than I can say." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness gathered. Tomorrow they'd reach Prescott, and the fragile world they'd built between them would face the harsh reality of courts and law. But tonight, they had this: a fire, the stars, and the knowledge that they'd chosen each other despite everything. "Clara, there's something I need to tell you." Beckett struggled with the words. "In Prescott, once the trial starts, I won't be able to protect you the same way. There'll be lawyers, procedures." "I know." She leaned against his shoulder. "You'll have to be the marshal again, Not just Beckett, but after. No. She placed a finger against his lips. No promises about after. We both know Thornton won't stop. Even if Judge Carter believes me, even if there's a real investigation, men like Thornton don't go down easily. Then we'll face whatever comes. Together, she kissed him softly. You're a good man. Beckett Rourke, whatever happens, remember that I've known more happiness in these past days than in years before. They made their bed under the stars, holding each other against the desert chill. But Beckett couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow would bring a reckoning none of them were prepared for. He woke before dawn to find Clara already up, standing at the edge of their camp, watching the eastern sky lighten. Couldn't sleep, he asked, dreaming of courtrooms. She hugged herself against the morning cold. Of Thornton's face when he realizes I'm alive. He'll be there, playing the concerned family friend, mourning my father's wayward daughter. Let him play his games. The truth is a luxury men like Thornton can't afford. She turned to him, eyes fierce. Promise me something. If anything happens in Prescott, if Thornton manages to, nothing will happen. Promise me. The urgency in her voice stopped him. This journal, make copies. Send them to newspapers in San Francisco, Denver, even Washington. Don't let it die with me. Clara? Please, I need to know it won't all be for nothing. He pulled her close. I promise, but you're going to testify, and Thornton is going to face justice. They broke camp as the sun rose, saddling the horses in practiced synchronization. The trail to Prescott wound through pine forests, a welcome change from the desert. The air was cooler here, scented with resin and possibility. They'd gone perhaps 5 miles when Clara suddenly reined up. Listen. At first, Beckett heard nothing unusual. Then it came, the distant sound of many horses, moving fast. Could be anyone, he said, but his hand went to his rifle. Could be. Clara's face had gone pale. But it's not. They spurred their horses forward, but it was no use. The riders were gaining, and soon Beckett could see them through the trees. A dozen men, riding hard. There, he pointed to a cluster of buildings ahead. The old Rodriguez mine. We can ford up. No. Clara stopped her horse. No more running. No more letting others die for me. Clara, we can't face 12 men in the open. We won't have to. She straightened in the saddle. Every inch the banker's daughter, despite her trail-worn appearance. They want me alive, at least long enough to destroy the journal. That gives us leverage. Before Beckett could stop her, she rode forward, hands raised. Mr. Thornton, I know you're there. Let's discuss this like civilized people. The riders surrounded them quickly, rifles trained on Beckett. And there, dressed in an expensive black suit despite the trail dust, sat Jacob Thornton himself. Miss Whitmore. His voice was cultured, pleasant, at odds with the hardness in his eyes. You've led us quite a chase. It's over. Thornton, Clara said. I've already sent copies of everything to federal authorities. Killing me now gains you nothing. Thornton smiled. My dear girl, do you think me a fool? You've been running for days, fighting for your life. When would you have had time for such correspondence? In Fort Defiance, before we left. The lie came smoothly. Marshal Rourke insisted on it, for my protection. Beckett saw doubt flicker across Thornton's face. The man couldn't be sure, and that uncertainty was their only weapon. Then it seems we're at an impasse, Thornton said finally. But I think not. You see, Marshal, while you've been focused on protecting Miss Whitmore, I've been busy in Cedar Falls. Judge Palmer has issued a new warrant for you, aiding a prisoner's escape. Dereliction of duty. Your career is over. My career was over the moment I chose justice over convenience. Beckett replied, How noble. Thornton's tone turned mocking. Tell me, Marshal, what will your justice accomplish when you're both dead? When the journal is destroyed and the investigation quietly shelved? The truth has a way of surfacing, Clara said. My father learned that, You will too. Your father was weak, sentimental. He actually wept when he signed the papers condemning you. Thornton leaned forward. Did you know he begged me to spare you? Offered everything, his share of the business, his remaining wealth, all for his precious daughter's life. Clara's composure cracked. You're lying. Am I? He loved you, in his broken way. That's why he had to die. Love is a luxury men in our position can't afford. You killed him? Clara's voice was barely a whisper. Heart failure. The doctor said, amazing how many things can cause a heart to fail. Thornton gestured to his men. Take them. But Beckett had been waiting for this moment of distraction. He drew and fired in one motion, his bullet taking Thornton in the shoulder. Ride! He shouted to Clara, spurring his own horse forward. Gunfire erupted around them. Beckett felt a bullet graze his ribs, another clip his hat, but they were through the circle, racing up the trail toward Prescott. Behind them. Thornton's voice rose above the chaos. Alive! I need them alive! The chase that followed was a nightmare of twisting trails and desperate chances. Their horses were fresher, but Thornton's men knew the territory gradually, inexorably. They were being herded away from Prescott, toward the abandoned mines that dotted these mountains. Beckett! Clara pointed ahead. The bridge! He saw it, a narrow wooden bridge spanning a deep gorge, their only way across, but also a perfect place for an ambush. We have to chance it! They thundered onto the bridge just as riders appeared on the far side, more of Thornton's men, closing the trap. Beckett wheeled his horse, saw the pursuit closing from behind. Jump! Clara didn't hesitate. She vaulted from her horse over the bridge's low railing, plummeting into the river far below. Beckett followed, the cold water hitting like a physical blow. The current was strong, sweeping them downstream. Beckett fought to reach Clara, finally catching her as they were swept around a bend. They dragged themselves onto a sandy bank, gasping. The journal! Clara coughed. It's ruined! The leather book was indeed soaked through, ink running in streams, their only evidence, destroyed. We'll find another way, Beckett said, though he could hear how hollow the words sounded. They stumbled through the forest, clothes drying stiff in the afternoon sun. Behind them, no immediate sounds of pursuit. Their plunge had bought time, but not much. As evening approached, they found shelter in a shallow cave. Clara was shivering, shock setting in from the day's revelations and near-death escapes. He killed my father. She stared at nothing. All this time, I thought father died from shame over what I'd done, but Thornton murdered him. I'm sorry. The words were inadequate, but Beckett had nothing else to offer. He was right about one thing. Clara continued. Love makes us weak. If I hadn't loved my father, hadn't tried to save him from himself, none of this would have happened. You're wrong. Beckett knelt beside her. Love is what makes us human. It's what separates us from men like Thornton. And what has it gotten us? We're fugitives now, both of us. The evidence is destroyed. Thornton wins. Not yet. We're still alive, still free. Judge Carter will listen. Journal or no journal, your testimony, the word of an accused embezzler and a rogue marshal. Clara laughed bitterly. Against one of the territory's most respected businessmen? Beckett had no answer. She was right. Without the journal, they had nothing but accusations, and Thornton had the law on his side now. There might be another way, Clara said slowly. Father kept duplicate records, hidden. He was paranoid about losing leverage over Thornton. If those documents still exist. Where? In the bank, in Cedar Falls. She met his eyes. We'd have to go back, walk right into Thornton's stronghold. That's suicide. Maybe, or maybe it's the only way to truly end this. She gripped his hands. I'm tired of running, Beckett, tired of letting fear rule my life. If we're going to fall, let's fall fighting for something that matters. He saw the determination in her eyes, the same fire that had first intrigued him in that jail cell in Fort Defiance. This was the woman who'd faced down her corrupt father, who'd survived assassination attempts and never broken. All right, he said. We go back, But we do it smart. Thornton thinks we're running for Prescott. He won't expect us to double back. And when we get there, we get your father's records. Then we find someone to listen. A federal marshal, a newspaper, someone Thornton can't reach. Together, they spent the night planning, weighing options and routes. By dawn, they had the skeleton of a scheme that might see them through. As they prepared to leave the cave, Clara stopped him. "Beckett, whatever happens next, I need you to know that night in the mountains wasn't desperation or fear. I meant it. All of it." He kissed her, pouring all the words he couldn't say into the gesture. When they parted, both knew it might be for the last time. They mounted their recovered horses and turned east, back toward Cedar Falls and whatever judgment awaited. The sun rose behind them, casting long shadows on the trail ahead. Two people against an empire of corruption, impossible odds by any measure. But as Beckett had learned in his years wearing the badge, sometimes impossible was just another word for necessary. And with Clara beside him, even the impossible seemed worth attempting. The journey back toward Cedar Falls was marked by a heavy silence between them. For 2 days, they'd ridden parallel to the main trail, keeping to deer paths and dry washes to avoid detection. The mountains gave way to red stone formations, then to the endless sage-dotted plains that preceded the town. Clara rode slightly ahead, her back rigid, eyes fixed on the horizon. She hadn't spoken more than necessary words since they'd turned east. "Water here. Riders coming. We should rest." The fire that had animated her in the cave seemed to have burned down to cold determination. Beckett understood. The revelation about her father's murder had shattered something in her. The guilt she'd carried for his death had been replaced by rage, and rage was a dangerous companion on a mission that required stealth and patience. On the second evening, they made camp in a grove of cottonwoods beside a nearly dry creek. Beckett tended the horses while Clara gathered kindling, their movements practiced but mechanical. When she returned with an armload of wood, he noticed her hands were bleeding from gripping the rough branches too tightly. "Let me see," he said quietly. She pulled away. "They're fine. Clara, I said they're fine." She began building the fire with sharp, angry movements. "We should reach the outskirts tomorrow night. We'll need to scout the bank, determine the guard patterns. We need to talk about your father." The words hung in the air. Clara's hands stilled on the kindling. "What's to talk about? He's dead. Thornton killed him. End of story. It's not the end. It's eating you alive." She whirled on him, eyes blazing. "What would you have me do? Weep? Wail? Forgive?" Her voice rose. "He destroyed lives. Beckett funded murderers. Then when I tried to stop him, he chose his corruption over his daughter. And I've carried the weight of his death for 2 years, thinking I drove him to it. You loved him. I loved who I thought he was." The fight went out of her suddenly, and she sank onto a fallen log. "The man who taught me mathematics by calculating star positions, who read me stories about knights and honor. That man died long before Thornton poisoned him." Beckett sat beside her, careful not to touch. Sometimes grief needed space. "I keep thinking," Clara continued, "about that last conversation. He came to my cell the night before he died, begged me to recant, to say I'd been confused, that the ledgers were forgeries. He said Thornton would drop the charges if I just stopped fighting. What did you tell him? That I'd rather hang than live a lie." Her laugh was broken glass. "Such noble words. And for what? He died anyway. The corruption continued, and I've spent 2 years running." "You stood for truth. That matters." "Does it? Tomorrow we might die trying to retrieve evidence of crimes that everyone already knows about but chooses to ignore. Where's the meaning in that?" Beckett was quiet for a moment, watching the fire catch and grow. "My father was a sheriff in Kansas. Honest as they come. Never took a bribe. Never looked away. When I was 15, he arrested the mayor's son for assault. 2 nights later, they burned our house. Father got me and my mother out, then went back for his evidence files." Clara looked at him. She'd never heard him speak of his past. The roof collapsed before he could get out. Beckett continued. Mother died of smoke inhalation a week later. I spent years hating him for choosing those files over staying with us, but eventually I understood. He didn't go back for papers. He went back for the idea that justice mattered more than convenience. And you became a marshal to honor that idea. I became a marshal because I couldn't become anything else. It's in the blood. The blessing and curse of believing law means something. He finally looked at her. Your father lost his way, but you didn't. That's the meaning. Clara leaned against his shoulder, and they sat watching the fire as darkness settled around them. After a while, she said, "Tell me about Kansas, before the fire." So he did. He talked about wheat fields that rolled like golden oceans, about his mother's apple pie, about learning to shoot behind the jail while his father discussed Blackstone with the circuit judge. Small memories, carefully preserved, shared now in the quiet night. In return, Clara spoke of Boston winters, of ice skating in the common, of the smell of her father's pipe tobacco mixing with leather-bound books in his study. The girl she'd been before the weight of truth crushed innocence. They talked until the fire burned low, bridging silence with words, building something fragile and necessary between them. When they finally slept, they lay close but not touching, each guarding their own pain while drawing comfort from proximity. The next day brought them to familiar territory. By afternoon, they could see Cedar Falls smoke rising in the distance. They sheltered in an abandoned prospector's shack to wait for nightfall, studying the town through Beckett's field glasses. "There," Clara pointed. "The bank's side entrance. Father had it installed for private meetings. The lock was always temperamental. You had to lift and turn simultaneously. Guards. 2 at the main entrance, always. But Thornton's arrogant. He thinks I'm running scared, not coming back. The side might be unwatched. Might be isn't good enough. It's what we have." She lowered the glasses. "Father's private office is on the 2nd floor. If the documents exist, they'll be in his safe. I know the combination, Mother's birthday. And if Thornton's changed it, then we improvise." They spent the remaining daylight hours preparing. Beckett cleaned and loaded every weapon, while Clara sketched the bank's layout from memory. As the sun set, they darkened their faces with ash and bound their horses in a thick stand of juniper outside town. The approach was agonizing. Every shadow could hide an enemy. Every sound might herald discovery. But the streets were largely empty, the saloons drawing most of the night traffic. They reached the bank's side entrance without incident. Clara worked the lock with practiced ease. The door opened on well-oiled hinges, revealing a dark corridor. They slipped inside, Beckett leading with his pistol drawn. The bank smelled of paper and ink, underlaid with something else. Cigars. Fresh cigars. Not the stale scent of years past. "Someone's been here recently," Beckett whispered. They climbed the narrow back stairs, each creak sounding like thunder in the silence. The door to Edgar Whitmore's office stood ajar, lamplight spilling into the hallway. Beckett gestured for Clara to stay back, then peered around the doorframe. Jacob Thornton sat behind the massive oak desk, a ledger open before him. He was alone, making notations with precise movements. "Do come in, Marshal," Thornton said without looking up. "And you as well. Clara, this hiding in doorways is undignified." Beckett entered slowly. Gun trained on Thornton. Clara followed, her face composed despite the situation. "I wondered when you'd come." Thornton continued, finally raising his eyes. His left arm was in a sling from Beckett's bullet. "Sentiment is such a predictable weakness. Of course you'd return for Edgar's files." "Where are they?" Clara's voice was steady. "Burned, naturally. The night your father died, I'm not fond of loose ends." He gestured to the ledger. "I was just reviewing the accounts. Your father was meticulous. I'll give him that. Every transaction recorded, every bribe noted. It would have been damning in the wrong hands." "You kept copies," Clara said. "You're too careful not to." "Perhaps, but you'll never find them." Thornton stood slowly. "I must admit, You've caused considerable inconvenience. Men dead, operations disrupted. All for what? A misguided sense of justice? For truth, Clara replied. Truth. Thornton laughed. Truth is what men with power say it is. Your father understood that, eventually. Before you murdered him, I ended his suffering. He was weak, broken by guilt. In a way, I did him a kindness. Thornton moved to the window, gazing out at the town. Cedar Falls exists because of men like me. Every business, every ranch, every life depends on the prosperity I've built. Remove me, and it all collapses. Built on blood, Beckett said. Built on necessity. This territory is harsh, Marshal. It requires harsh men to tame it. Thornton turned back to them. Which brings us to the present situation. You can't kill me. Half the town would hear the shot. You can't arrest me. You have no authority here. So what exactly is your plan? Clara stepped forward. You're right. We can't touch you here. But others can. Federal marshals, newspaper men, politicians who aren't in your pocket. Your empire is already cracking. Thornton, we're just here to watch it fall. Are you? Thornton smiled. How fascinating. Tell me, did you really think I'd be sitting here alone? That I wouldn't expect this desperate gambit? The door burst open. Armed men flooded in. Not hired guns, but townsmen, the baker, the livery owner, men Beckett recognized from his previous visits, all pointing weapons at them. You see, Thornton said, I own this town in ways you can't imagine. Every man here owes me money, position, or secrets. They'll do whatever I ask. Including murder. Beckett kept his gun on Thornton, though he knew it was useless. If necessary, though I prefer more elegant solutions. Thornton returned to the desk. Clara, your testimony could damage certain operations. I'll offer you a choice. Sign a confession admitting to embezzlement, clearing your father's name posthumously, and leave the territory forever. Or die here, tonight, and be remembered as the criminal who returned to steal more. My father's name doesn't deserve clearing, Clara said, and I won't run anymore. Then you'll die, both of you. Thornton nodded to his men. Take them to the cellar, quietly. We'll stage a break-in gone wrong. Tragic, really. A rogue marshal helping his prisoner lover attempt theft. The men moved forward. Beckett calculated odds, trajectories, chances, all hopeless. But as they were herded toward the door, Clara stumbled, catching herself on the desk. Her hand swept across its surface, knocking over the ink well. Clumsy, Thornton said coldly. Watkins, help Miss Whitmore. But Clara had already palmed what she'd wanted, a small key from beneath the blotter. She met Beckett's eyes, a plan forming between them in silence. In the cellar, their captors bound them to support posts. The baker, Jennings, looked uncomfortable with the work. Nothing personal, Marshal, he muttered. But Mr. Thornton holds my note. I can't lose the bakery. Everyone has reasons. Beckett replied. Doesn't make it right. The men left them in darkness, the cellar door bolting heavily. Clara immediately went to work on her bonds, the stolen key proving to be a small knife, probably Thornton's letter opener. Father showed me this when I was young, she whispered, sawing at the ropes. Every banker needs protection, he said. She freed herself, then Beckett. But the cellar door was solid oak, locked from outside. The only other exit was a coal chute, too narrow for adults. They'll come back soon, Clara said. Thornton won't wait long. Beckett examined the cellar by touch, finding the walls lined with shelves. His hands encountered bottles. Thornton's wine collection. How flammable is wine? He asked. Not very, but... Clara moved to another wall. Father kept brandy down here, private stock for special clients. They found several crates of high-proof spirits, working quickly. They soaked everything flammable, wooden shelves, old ledgers, anything that would burn. Beckett used his flint to spark a flame. This will bring the whole town, Clara said. That's the idea. The fire caught quickly, fed by alcohol and old paper. Smoke began filling the cellar. They retreated to the far wall. where Beckett had noticed earlier that the mortar between stones was crumbling. "Together," he said, and they threw their weight against the weakened wall. On the third try, stones gave way, revealing a crawl space that connected to the neighboring building's foundation. They squeezed through as shouts erupted above. The fire had been noticed. Soon the volunteer fire brigade would mobilize, and in the chaos, two soot-covered figures might slip away unnoticed. They emerged in the alley behind the general store. Already, the bank's windows glowed orange. People ran past, shouting orders, forming bucket lines. "The livery," Beckett said. "We need horses." But Clara shook her head. "Not yet. There's one more thing." She led him through the confusion to a small house on the town's edge. Modest, well-kept, with the roses growing despite the desert climate. "Judge Palmer lives here," she explained. "Father's documents might be gone, but Palmer knows everything, and right now, he'll be at the fire." They broke in through a back window. Clara went straight to a roll-top desk, searching with desperate efficiency. Father said Palmer kept insurance, records to protect himself if Thornton ever turned on him. "Clara, we don't have time." "Found them." She held up a leather portfolio. Even in the dim light, Beckett could see it was stuffed with papers. Letters, contracts, signed confessions. Palmer documented everything. Shouts outside grew closer. Someone had noticed the break-in or guessed their location. They fled through the front door as men rounded the corner. "There! Stop them!" Gunfire erupted. Beckett and Clara ran through yards, vaulted fences. The portfolio clutched tightly. Behind them, pursuit grew. But the fire had drawn most of the town. Their pursuers were few and disorganized. They reached the juniper grove where their horses waited. As they mounted, Beckett looked back to see the bank fully ablaze. Thornton's empire literally burning. "Where now?" Clara asked. "Prescott. Judge Carter." "With those documents, he'll have to act." They rode hard into the darkness, the glow of Cedar Falls fading behind them. But as dawn approached, exhaustion forced them to stop. They sheltered in a box canyon, horses heaving, both covered in soot and sweat. Clara opened the portfolio with trembling hands. Page after page of incriminating evidence spilled out, payments to assassins, land theft, judicial bribes, even correspondence about Edgar Whitmore's murder. "It's all here," she breathed. "Everything. Palmer was more thorough than Father ever was." "Then we've won." "Have we?" Clara looked at him with tired eyes. "Thornton has resources, influence, even with this evidence. It's enough. It has to be enough." She leaned against him, and he held her as the sun rose over the desert. They were fugitives still, hunted and exhausted. But for the first time since leaving Fort Defiance, they had more than hope. They had proof. "Beckett?" Clara's voice was soft. "When this is over, when Thornton's brought to justice, what then? You'll have your badge back, your duty, and you'll have me," he said firmly. "Badge or no badge, if you want me." "After everything? After I've brought you nothing but trouble? You've brought me purpose, truth, a reason to believe the law can mean something." He tilted her face up. "You've brought me love. Clara, that's worth any trouble." She kissed him then, salt of tears mixing with soot and dust. When they parted, her eyes held new determination. "Then let's finish this together." They mounted again as the morning heated around them. 3 days to Prescott, carrying evidence that could topple an empire of corruption. Behind them, Thornton would be mobilizing every resource. Ahead lay judgment, harsh, necessary, and finally, just. The horses' hooves kicked up dust that caught the early light like gold. 2 riders against the morning, carrying truth like a weapon, racing toward whatever ending fate would write. Dawn came slowly to their makeshift camp in the pines, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Beckett woke to find Clara already sitting up. Judge Palmer's portfolio spread across her lap, studying the documents by early light. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, noting the dark circles under her eyes. "Too much to read?" She held up a letter. This one details payments to the men who burned out the Hendricks family. Remember them? They wouldn't sell their water rights to Thornton's mining operation. Beckett remembered. 5 dead, including 2 children. It had been ruled an Apache raid, but everyone whispered the truth. And this, Clara continued, her voice tight with controlled fury, is Thornton's instructions for framing me. Every detail planned, which documents to alter, which witnesses to buy, even what my father should say at the trial. Clara, I'm all right. But her hands trembled as she sorted papers. We're only a day from Prescott. I need to organize these. Make sure Judge Carter sees the worst first. He moved to sit beside her, noting how thin she'd become during their flight. The elegant banker's daughter was gone, replaced by someone harder, leaner, forged by survival. You need rest, food. The documents won't disappear. Won't they? She looked at him with haunted eyes. How many times have we thought we were safe? How many times has Thornton been one step ahead? As if summoned by her words, the sound of horses reached them. Many horses, moving fast through the forest below. Beckett grabbed his rifle, scanning the tree line. Pack the papers, now! They'd chosen their campsite well. High ground with good sight lines. But that wouldn't matter if they were surrounded. Clara stuffed documents back into the portfolio while Beckett saddled their exhausted horses. The first riders appeared through the pines, not Thornton's hired guns, but Apache scouts. Beckett's heart sank. Of all the complications they didn't need. But the lead rider raised his hand in greeting, not threat. As he drew closer, Beckett recognized him with shock. Joseph Crow Dog, the same warrior who'd ambushed them at Skeleton Ridge. Marshal, Crow Dog said calmly. We meet again. Beckett kept his rifle ready but not aimed. Come to finish what you started. Come to repay a debt. The Apache dismounted, his movements careful and peaceful. You spared my wounded at the ridge, shot only to defend. This is remembered. We're grateful, but you are hunted. Crow Dog's eyes moved to Clara. The banker's daughter who spoke truth about stolen gold? Yes, we know. Thornton's men are 2 hours behind you, maybe less. They have trackers, dogs. Clara stepped forward. Why would you help us? Thornton sells guns to our enemies. His mines poison our water. His kind will destroy this land until nothing remains. Crow Dog smiled grimly. My enemy's enemy is still an Apache warrior the army wants dead, Beckett pointed out. As they want you dead now. Difference is, we know these mountains. He gestured to his men. We can lead you to Prescott by paths no white man knows, or you can stay on this trail and die before sunset. Beckett and Clara exchanged glances. Trust came hard in the territory, especially across the racial divide. But Crow Dog was right. They could hear the baying of dogs now. Still distant, but closing. All right, Beckett decided. Lead on. They followed the Apache up treacherous deer trails and through narrow canyons Beckett would never have found alone. Their horses struggled with the terrain, but the sound of pursuit faded as they climbed higher into the mountains. At midday, they stopped at a hidden spring to water the horses. Crow Dog studied Clara with interest. You are not like the other white women. You fight, survive. Why? Because the truth matters. Clara replied simply, Truth. The warrior considered this. Your people have many words for lies. Treaty, promise, law. But truth, this is rare. Not all of us lie. Beckett said, No, some try to walk straight. Crow Dog's expression softened slightly. My grandfather spoke of such men before the lies grew too thick to see through. They pushed on through the afternoon, the Apache setting a punishing pace. Clara swayed in her saddle, exhaustion finally overtaking adrenaline, but she didn't complain. Beckett rode close, ready to catch her if she fell. As the sun began its descent, Crow Dog called a halt at a ridge overlooking a valley. Below, the lights of Prescott twinkled in the gathering dusk. We leave you here, he announced. Town is 2 hours, maybe 3. Stay off the main road. Thornton has men watching. Why? Clara asked suddenly. Why risk your people for us?" Crow Dog was quiet for a moment. "My daughter is your age. When the soldiers came to the reservation, men like Thornton said she and others would be safe at the school. They lied. She never came home." His voice hardened. "So when I can strike at such men, I strike through you, if needed." He wheeled his horse and disappeared into the forest, his warriors flowing after him like smoke. Beckett and Clara sat alone on the ridge, the weight of unexpected alliance settling over them. "We should move," Beckett said finally. "Full dark will help." They descended carefully, avoiding the main trail as Crow Dog had advised. Prescott was larger than Cedar Falls, with actual law enforcement and federal presence, if they could reach Judge Carter. But as they neared the town's outskirts, Clara suddenly gasped. "Beckett, look!" A line of armed men blocked the road ahead. Not random guards. These were positioned specifically, checking every traveler. Thornton's reach extended even here. "We can't go around." Clara said, "They'll have the other routes watched too." Beckett studied the situation, mind racing. Then he smiled grimly. "No, we go through, but not as ourselves." An hour later, a Mexican trader's wagon approached the checkpoint. The driver, face hidden beneath a broad sombrero, called out in broken English, "Supplies for the mission, flour, beans." The guards looked bored. One climbed up to check the wagon bed, poking at sacks with his rifle butt. He didn't notice the slight movement of one particular grain sack, or the way the driver's hand hovered near a concealed pistol. "Move along," the guard finally said. The wagon rolled through. Once past the checkpoint, Beckett guided it to a livery stable where the real trader, paid handsomely to loan his wagon and clothes, waited nervously. Clara emerged from among the grain sacks, spitting dust. "I'm getting truly tired of hiding in containers." "Almost over," Beckett promised. "Judge Carter's house is 3 streets north." They made their way through shadows, the portfolio clutched tightly. Prescott was busy even at night, saloons and gambling halls spilling light and noise. They had nearly reached Carter's street when a familiar voice froze them. "Miss Whitmore, Marshal, please don't run." James Morrison, the lawyer Clara had mentioned days ago, stepped from an alley. He looked haggard, afraid, but raised empty hands. "I'm alone. Please, I must speak with you." "It's a trap," Beckett said, hand on his gun. "No trap. I know about the documents, about what you're carrying." Morrison's voice dropped. "Thornton knows too. He's already at Judge Carter's, spinning his version. You walk in there now. You'll be arrested before you can speak." "You're his creature," Clara accused. "You defended him in court." "I was, until he murdered your father." Morrison's face crumpled. "Edgar was my friend, whatever his faults, when I learned the truth. But I was too much a coward to act, until now." "What do you propose?" Beckett asked, warily. "There's another way. Judge Carter's not the only federal authority in town. Marshal Elijah Brooks arrived yesterday from Denver. He's investigating corruption in the territory. Reports directly to Washington." Morrison pulled out a card. "He's staying at the Continental Hotel, room 12. "Why should we trust you?" Clara demanded. "Because I have this." Morrison produced a leather journal, Edgar Whitmore's personal diary. He gave it to me the night before he died. Said if anything happened, I should, but I hid instead. I've been carrying this guilt ever since. Clara took the diary with shaking hands, flipped through pages of her father's handwriting. "It's real," she whispered. "His confession, everything." "Go to Marshal Brooks." Morrison urged. "I'll try to delay things at Carter's. Claim I have information about your whereabouts. Buy you time." Before they could respond, he vanished back into the shadows. Beckett and Clara stood in the empty street, weighing desperate options. "It could still be a trap," Beckett said, "or our only chance." Clara held the diary like a lifeline. "Father trusted Morrison once. Maybe is dangerous. Everything's dangerous now." She touched his arm. But I'd rather act than wait to be captured. They found the Continental Hotel, a modest establishment that catered to traveling officials. The clerk, half asleep, barely glanced at them as they climbed to the second floor. Room 12's door stood slightly ajar, lamplight spilling into the hallway. Beckett drew his gun, pushed the door wider. Marshal Elijah Brooks sat at a small desk, writing. He was older than Beckett, gray-bearded, with the weathered look of a man who'd spent decades enforcing law in hard places. He looked up calmly, as if he'd been expecting them. Marshal Rourke, Miss Whitmore. He set down his pen. Please, come in. We have much to discuss. You know who we are? Clara asked. I know Thornton's version. Also know his type. Met plenty over the years. Brooks gestured to chairs. But I prefer to hear truth from the source. Morrison said you'd have documents? For the next hour, Clara laid out the evidence. Palmer's records, her father's diary, her own testimony. Brooks listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. His expression grew darker with each revelation. This is extensive, he finally said. More than enough for federal prosecution, but Thornton's already moving. He's gotten warrants issued, branded you both as fugitives. Then it's over? Clara's voice was hollow. Far from it. Brooks stood, strapping on his gun belt. See, I've got authority that supersedes local warrants when federal crimes are involved. And what you've shown me, mail fraud, interstate commerce violations, conspiracy, that's as federal as it gets. You'll help us? Beckett could hardly believe it. I'll do more than help. I'll arrest Thornton tonight, before he can run or destroy more evidence. Brooks smiled grimly. Been wanting to take down someone like him for years. You've given me the tools. But as they prepared to leave, footsteps thundered in the hallway. The door burst open. Thornton's men, led by the corrupt Sheriff Palmer himself. Thought you'd slip away? Palmer sneered. Morrison cracked under pressure, told us everything. Sheriff, Brooks said calmly, you're interrupting federal business. Federal? Palmer laughed. You're harboring fugitives. My authority ends where mine begins. Brooks drew with shocking speed for an older man, his gun covering Palmer before anyone could react. These people are under federal protection. Anyone who interferes will answer to Washington. The tension stretched taut. Palmer's men looked uncertain, local thugs suddenly facing consequences beyond Thornton's reach. You can't protect them forever, Palmer said. Don't need forever. Just tonight. Brooks kept his gun steady. Now get out, before I arrest you for obstruction. Palmer retreated, but his parting look promised violence when they were gone. Brooks turned to Beckett and Clara. That bought us hours, maybe less. We need to move fast. They spent the remaining night in frantic activity. Brooks telegraphed his superiors in Denver, sent copies of key documents by special courier, and deputized several federal agents he trusted. By dawn, a small but determined force was ready. Thornton's holed up at his ranch, Brooks explained as they rode out. Got maybe 30 men with him. This won't be easy. Nothing's been easy, Clara said. She rode beside Beckett, wearing a borrowed badge as a material witness under federal protection. But it's ending today, one way or another. The rising sun painted Thornton's ranch in deceptively peaceful colors. But Beckett could see the armed men stationed around the main house, the horses saddled and ready for flight. He knows we're coming, Brooks observed. Good. I want him to see justice approaching. They formed a line on the ridge overlooking the ranch, federal badge beside territorial badge, united in purpose. Clara sat straight in her saddle, no longer the frightened prisoner from Fort Defiance, but a woman who'd found her strength in pursuit of truth. Ready? Brooks asked. Beckett looked at Clara, saw his own determination reflected in her eyes. They'd come so far, survived so much. Now, in the growing light of a new day, justice waited just below. Ready, they said together. Brooks raised his hand, and they descended toward Thornton's stronghold, carrying the weight of law and righteousness against the fortress of corruption. Whatever came next, they would face it as they'd faced everything else, together. unafraid, and unwilling to let truth die in darkness. The final confrontation approached with the inevitability of sunrise, and for the first time since leaving Fort Defiance, Beckett believed they might actually see justice done. The siege at Thornton's ranch ended with a whimper rather than a bang. When the federal marshals breached the main house, they found it empty save for a few loyal servants. Thornton had fled in the night, taking his most trusted men and what portable wealth he could carry. "Damn!" Brooks spat, surveying the abandoned office. Papers burned in the fireplace. Safes stood open and empty. He got word somehow, but Clara was already at the desk, pulling at a hidden drawer her father had once shown her. "He was in too much of a hurry," she said, producing a slim ledger. "This is his personal account book, the real one." They spent 3 days at the ranch, cataloging evidence and rounding up those followers too slow or stupid to flee. Each captured man provided more testimony, building a case that even Thornton's money couldn't dissolve. On the 4th day, as Beckett helped load evidence wagons, Clara found him in the stables. She looked different in the simple dress Brooks had procured for her, younger, almost vulnerable. "They found him," she said quietly. "Thornton. He was heading for Mexico, but cavalry intercepted him at Devil's Canyon. Is he alive, in custody? Brooks says the trial will be in Denver, federal court." She leaned against a stall door. "It's over." But Beckett heard the uncertainty in her voice. "What troubles you? I thought I'd feel more vindicated, perhaps, or at least relieved." She managed a wan smile. "Instead, I just feel empty." He understood. For so long, survival and justice had consumed them. Now, with those battles won, what remained? "Brooks asked me to testify," Clara continued. "It could take months, and after—" She trailed off, unwilling to voice what they both knew. After the trial, their paths would naturally diverge. "Clara, we should go," she interrupted. "Brooks wants us back in Prescott by nightfall." The next weeks blurred together. Depositions, statements, endless legal procedures. Clara threw herself into the work with fierce determination, as if activity could replace the growing distance between them. They were rarely alone now, always surrounded by lawyers, marshals, reporters who'd gotten wind of the sensational story. Beckett found himself relegated to the edges of Clara's new world. He was a key witness. Yes, but no longer her protector. She didn't need him anymore, not with federal protection and the machinery of justice finally working in her favor. One evening, he found her in the hotel garden, reading through her testimony for the 100th time. She looked up at his approach, and for a moment, he saw the woman from the cave again. Vulnerable. Real. His. "How are you?" he asked, settling beside her on the bench. "Prepared. Brooks says my testimony alone could convict Thornton." "That's not what I asked." She set down the papers, really looking at him for the first time in days. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "Not of Thornton or the trial, of what comes after. After doesn't have to be goodbye." "Doesn't it?" Her laugh was bitter. "You'll get your badge back, return to your duties. What? I have no home, no family, no purpose beyond this trial. You have me." "Do I?" She stood abruptly. "These past weeks, you've been pulling away. Don't deny it. I felt it." Beckett wanted to protest, but she was right. Faced with her transformation back into a lady of society, even a disgraced one, he'd retreated into the familiar role of lawman. "I don't belong in your world," he said quietly. "My world." Clara's eyes flashed. "My world was destroyed. Everything I have now, everything I am, was forged on that journey with you. You're not pulling away because you don't belong. You're pulling away because you're afraid." "Of what?" "The same thing I am, that without danger forcing us together, we'll discover it was all just circumstances." The word hung between them like a blade. Before Beckett could respond, Morrison appeared in the garden doorway. "Miss Whitmore, Marshal Brooks needs you." There's been a development. They found Brooks in his office, face grim. Thornton's lawyers filed a motion. They're claiming the evidence is tainted, that Marshal Rourke here exceeded his authority, rendering everything that followed illegal. That's absurd, Clara protested. Legally, it has merit. He was ordered to deliver you to Cedar Falls, not Prescott. Everything after he deviated. Brooks shrugged. Good lawyers can make that look like kidnapping. So testifying could incriminate Beckett? Clara paled. No, I won't. You'll testify. Beckett interrupted. Thornton doesn't walk free because of legal technicalities. Even if it means prison for you? Even then. Brooks cleared his throat. There might be another way. If you were to marry before the trial, spousal privilege would protect you both from certain questions. It's not perfect, but... The suggestion fell into silence. Clara's cheeks flushed, while Beckett felt his chest tighten. We couldn't, just for legal protection, Clara stammered. Think about it, Brooks said gently. The trial starts in 3 days. Outside the office, they walked in awkward silence. The proposal hung between them, transforming every glance, every accidental touch. It would be a business arrangement, Clara finally said. Protection for both of us. Nothing more. If that's what you want. She stopped walking, turned to face him. What I want is impossible. I want those days on the trail back, when everything was clear. When we were just Beckett and Clara, not witnesses and victims and symbols. Those people still exist. Do they? She searched his face. Can you honestly say you still see me the same way? Beckett thought of her in the cave, rain-soaked and defiant, of quiet moments by campfires, of desperate flight and fierce kisses, of the woman who'd shot a man to save him, who'd faced down Thornton without flinching. No, he admitted. I don't see you the same way. Clara's face fell, but he continued. I see you clearer now. Not just brave, but brilliant. Not just beautiful, but unbreakable. You've become more than I ever imagined, and it terrifies me because I'm just a territorial marshal who doesn't know how to love someone that magnificent. Her eyes filled with tears. You impossible fool. Don't you understand? You made me magnificent. Every moment of courage came from knowing you believed I could be more than a fallen banker's daughter. Clara, marry me. The words burst from her like a dam breaking. Not for legal protection, not for the trial. Marry me because I can't imagine a future without you in it. You're asking me? Someone has to be brave enough to say it. She stepped closer. I love you, Beckett Rourke. Have since you bandaged my ankle and looked at me like I was worth saving. Marry me, and let the rest sort itself. He kissed her then. There in the middle of the street. Propriety be damned. When they parted, both were breathless. Is that a yes? Clara asked. That's a yes. They married 2 days later in a simple ceremony. Brooks served as witness. Morrison gave Clara away, and a handful of federal marshals stood guard. Clara wore a borrowed blue dress and wildflowers in her hair. Beckett had found a clean shirt and had even submitted to a proper shave. Do you, Clara Whitmore, take this man? The justice of the peace droned through familiar words, but Beckett barely heard them. He was lost in Clara's eyes, remembering another ceremony of sorts. 2 people choosing each other in a cave while storms raged outside. When it came time for rings, they had none. But Clara produced 2 items, the marshal's badge Beckett had turned in, and her father's pocket watch. Symbols of our past, she whispered, transformed into promises for our future. They exchanged these tokens, and when the justice pronounced them married, their kiss tasted of redemption and new beginnings. That night, in their hotel room, they came together as husband and wife, but more than legal ceremony had changed between them. The desperate hunger of the trail had evolved into something deeper, a claiming not just of bodies, but of souls. No regrets? Beckett asked as they lay entwined afterward. Only one. Clara murmured against his chest, that it took us so long to get here. The trial began the next morning. Denver's federal courthouse was packed with spectators, journalists and legal observers. Thornton sat at the defendant's table, still elegant despite chains, his eyes boring into Clara as she took the witness stand. "State your name for the record," the prosecutor began. "Clara Whitmore Rourke." She said it firmly, claiming both past and present. 4 hours. She testified. Every detail of her father's corruption, Thornton's crimes, the attempts on her life. She never faltered, never looked away from the man who'd orchestrated so much death. When Thornton's lawyer rose to cross-examine, his first question was predictable. "Mrs. Rourke, is it true you're married to the marshal who allegedly arrested you?" "Objection," the prosecutor called. "Relevance? Goes to witness credibility. Your Honor, a woman who marries her captor might say anything." The judge allowed it, and Clara faced down the implication with steel in her voice. "I married the man who saved my life repeatedly, who chose justice over convenience, who showed me that honor still exists in this territory. How romantic, and how convenient that this marriage protects you both from certain uncomfortable questions." Clara leaned forward. "You want uncomfortable questions? Ask your client about the Hendricks family. Ask about my father's murder. Ask about the blood on every dollar in his accounts." "Your Honor, ask him." Clara's composure finally cracked, revealing the fury beneath. "Ask Jacob Thornton how many people died for his empire. Ask him if it was worth it." The courtroom erupted. The judge gabbled for order while Thornton's face flushed with rage. When quiet resumed, Clara straightened her shoulders. "I apologize, Your Honor, but I've carried these truths too long to let legal maneuvering silence them now." Her testimony continued for 3 days. By the end, even Thornton's expensive lawyers looked defeated. The evidence was overwhelming, Clara's account unshakable. Beckett testified next, detailing the attempts on Clara's life, the corruption he'd witnessed. When asked about exceeding his authority, he was blunt. "I was ordered to deliver a prisoner for trial. When I learned that trial would be a mockery, justice demanded I act. I'd do it again. Even knowing it might cost you your career?" Beckett looked at Clara, saw her small, encouraging smile. "Some things matter more than careers." The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts, Thornton would hang for murder. Serve life for the rest. As the verdict was read, he stared at Clara with undimmed hatred. "This isn't over," he mouthed. But it was. His empire crumbled within days. Co-conspirators fleeing or turning state's evidence. The territorial government, shaken by scandal, began long overdue reforms. A week after the trial, Beckett and Clara stood on a hill overlooking Denver. The city sprawled below them, civilization creeping across the wilderness. "Brooks offered me a federal badge," Beckett said. "Deputy Marshal, working out of Denver. And? Told him I'd think about it." He turned to her. "Depends on what you want to do. Morrison says your father's legitimate assets could be recovered. You could rebuild, start fresh." Clara laughed. "As a banker, can you see me behind a desk, calculating interest?" "What then?" She was quiet for a moment. "There's talk of starting a newspaper, one that actually investigates, exposes corruption before it takes root. Morrison thinks I'd be good at it." "You would be. It would mean staying in Denver, building something new. Together? Always together." She took his hand. "We've been tested by fire. Beckett, everything else should be easy." He doubted that. Nothing in the territory came easy. But as he looked at his wife, brilliant, unbreakable Clara, he knew they'd face whatever came. They'd chosen each other on a desperate flight through the desert. Now they'd choose each other again in the ordinary moments that built a life. "So," Clara said, leaning into him as the sun set behind the mountains. "Ready for a new adventure? With you, always." They stood together as darkness gathered. Two souls who'd found each other in violence and held fast through justice. Behind them lay the trail from Fort Defiance, blood and bullets, caves and courtrooms. Ahead stretched the unknown, bright with possibility. And in that moment, on that hill, with Clara's hand in his and the future sprawling before them like an unwritten page, Beckett knew the greatest truth of all. Sometimes the law that mattered most was the one written in the heart, and love was the only justice that lasted. The morning of their departure from Denver dawned crisp and clear. Beckett loaded the last of their belongings onto the wagon. A new one, sturdy and well-provisioned. Clara emerged from the hotel wearing practical traveling clothes, her hair braided simply. The transformation from society lady to frontier woman was complete. "Second thoughts?" he asked, helping her onto the seat. "About leaving Denver?" "No." She looked back at the city one last time. "Thornton's trial is over. Justice was served. Now it's time to build something new." They'd decided against the newspaper after all. During the weeks of legal proceedings, word had spread of their story. Letters arrived from across the territory, pleas for help from those facing corruption, injustice, violence with nowhere to turn. One letter in particular had decided their course. "Cedar Falls," Clara said, reading the latest correspondence. "They want us to come back, help rebuild after Thornton's fall. The town council is offering you the position of sheriff, and they need someone to reorganize the bank, ensure it serves the community honestly. You sure about this? Going back to where it all started? Where we started?" She corrected. "It feels right, doesn't it? Full circle, but different." The journey to Cedar Falls took 4 days. They followed the same route Beckett had taken months ago as a marshal transporting a prisoner. Now he traveled as a husband, beside a woman who'd become his partner in every sense. They camped at Willow Springs the second night, the same place where Clara had first told him about her father's corruption. As they sat by the fire, she pulled out a worn journal, not evidence this time, but her own writings. "I've been documenting our story," she said, almost shyly, "thinking maybe someday people should know what really happened." Beckett listened as she read passages aloud. Their first meeting in Fort Defiance, the ambush at Skeleton Ridge, the storm in the cave. Her words brought it all back with vivid clarity, but also with a perspective he hadn't possessed while living it. "You make us sound like heroes," he said. "Aren't we? In our own way?" She closed the journal. "We stood against corruption, fought for truth, found love despite everything trying to tear us apart. If that's not heroic, what is?" On the third day, they encountered a familiar figure on the trail. Joseph Crow Dog sat his horse at a crossroads, as if he'd been waiting for them. "Marshal, Mrs. Rourke." He inclined his head respectfully. "News travels. You return to Cedar Falls." "We do," Beckett confirmed. "And you?" "I thought the Army. The Army chases shadows." Crow Dog's smile was enigmatic. "But shadows sometimes watch over those who dealt fairly with them. Your new town, it will need protection. Not all of Thornton's men were caught. You're offering to help? I'm offering to remember. Good lawmen are rare. When wolves circle, sometimes the eagle screams warning." He turned his horse. "Walk in peace, Marshal, both of you." He vanished into the landscape, leaving them with an unexpected sense of reassurance. Cedar Falls appeared on the horizon the 4th day, but it looked different than the town they'd fled. The burned bank had been cleared, new construction rising from the ashes. People moved with purpose rather than fear. The shadow of Thornton's corruption was lifting. A delegation met them at the town limits. Mayor Hutchins, several council members, even some faces Beckett recognized from Thornton's forced militia. They looked sheepish now, eager to make amends. "Marshal Rourke, Mrs. Rourke." Hutchins pumped their hands enthusiastically. "Can't tell you how glad we are you accepted our offer. Town needs honest law, honest banking, needs folks who've proven they can't be bought." They were escorted to a modest but clean house on Elm Street. "Sheriff's residence," Hutchins explained. "Yours now, and Mrs. Rourke. The bank building should be ready within the month. Until then, we've set up temporary offices." That evening, as they unpacked in their new home, Clara found something wrapped in brown paper. Inside was Beckett's Marshal badge, the one they'd exchanged as a wedding token. Pinned to it was a note in Brooks's handwriting. "Thought you might want this back. Federal offer stands if you change your mind. E.B." "You miss it?" Clara asked. The federal authority? Sometimes, Beckett admitted. But sheriff's work is good too. Protecting a community, building something lasting. And you won't be alone. She pinned the badge to his shirt. Partners. Remember? The next weeks flew by in a blur of activity. Beckett established new protocols for the sheriff's office, deputizing men he could trust, setting up regular patrols. Clara dove into the bank's tangled accounts, unraveling years of corruption, establishing transparent practices that served ranchers and merchants rather than exploiting them. Not everyone welcomed the changes. One evening, 3 of Thornton's former associates confronted Beckett outside the sheriff's office. "You cost us everything," one snarled. "Thornton's gone, but we remember who put him there." "Then you remember wrong," Beckett replied calmly. "Thornton put himself in that noose through greed and murder. You boys can accept the new order or move on. Choice is yours." They backed down, but he knew it wasn't over. That night, he found Clara working late at the bank, ledgers spread across her desk. "You should have an escort after dark," he said. "I have one." She smiled up at him. "My husband, the sheriff." "Clara, I'm serious. Not everyone's happy about the changes." "I know." Her expression sobered. "Morrison warned me. Some people profited from the old corruption. But we can't let fear stop us from doing what's right." She was correct, of course. They'd faced worse than disgruntled profiteers. Still, Beckett insisted on increased security, remembering too well how quickly violence could shatter peace. The attack came 2 weeks later. Clara was returning from visiting a ranch, evaluating a loan for irrigation improvements. The 2 men who ambushed her coach clearly expected easy prey. They hadn't counted on Clara Rourke. By the time Beckett arrived with deputies, alerted by the coach driver who'd ridden hard for help, Clara had one attacker subdued at gunpoint while the other nursed a bullet wound in his shoulder. "They thought a lady banker would be defenseless," she said, handing over her derringer. "Their mistake. You could have been killed," Beckett said later, after the attackers were locked up. "But I wasn't, because you taught me to defend myself. To be ready." She touched his face gently. "We can't live in fear, Beckett. That's what men like Thornton want, people too scared to stand up." She was right, and the town noticed. Clara's courage in facing the attackers, combined with Beckett's firm but fair law enforcement, began to shift Cedar Falls' culture. People spoke up about problems instead of suffering silently. Merchants dealt honestly, knowing the sheriff wouldn't tolerate cheating. The bank became a tool for growth rather than exploitation. 6 months after their return, Clara made an announcement that changed everything. "I'm pregnant," she told Beckett one evening, finding him on their porch watching the sunset. He nearly dropped his coffee. We're going to be parents." Her smile was radiant but nervous. "I know we haven't talked about children, with everything so unsettled." Beckett pulled her onto his lap, holding her close. "Nothing's unsettled. We have a home, purpose, each other. A child just makes it more complete. You're not worried? Raising a child in a town that's still finding its way. Our child will grow up seeing parents who stand for something, who choose right over easy. What better legacy?" Clara kissed him, and they sat together as stars emerged overhead. The future stretched before them, not the uncertain flight of fugitives, but the steady building of lives worth living. As months passed, Clara's pregnancy progressed alongside the town's transformation. The new bank building opened, with Clara managing operations until her condition required her to train assistants. Beckett's deputies grew into a professional force, maintaining order through respect rather than fear. When labor pains began on a storm-lashed night, Beckett paced the bedroom while Doc Harrison and the midwife tended Clara. Thunder crashed overhead, reminding him painfully of another storm. Another night when everything changed. "Stop worrying," Clara gasped between contractions. "This is natural danger, not the kind that requires your gun." But when their daughter finally arrived, squalling and perfect, Beckett felt the same protective, fierce love that had driven him to save Clara all those months ago. They named her Hope, for the future, for new beginnings. for the faith that good could triumph over evil. "She's beautiful," Clara whispered, exhausted but glowing. "Look what we made, Beckett. Look what we all made," he corrected, glancing out the window at Cedar Falls' peaceful streets. A place where she can grow up safe, free. News of Hope's birth spread quickly. Gifts arrived from unexpected sources. A hand-carved rattle from Crow Dog's people, delivered mysteriously in the night. A savings bond from Judge Brooks. Even Morrison sent congratulations from Denver, where he was helping prosecute the remnants of Thornton's network. Years passed. Hope grew into a spirited child with her mother's intelligence and her father's sense of justice. She played in the bank while Clara worked, learned to ride at the sheriff's office while Beckett made rounds. The town grew too, attracting families drawn by its reputation for honest law and fair dealing. One evening, as the family sat for dinner, Hope asked the question they'd always known would come. "Papa, Mama, why do people sometimes whisper when they see us? Mrs. Henderson said you two have quite a story." Beckett and Clara exchanged glances. Their daughter was 8 now, old enough for some truths. "Your mama was very brave once," Beckett began. "She stood up to bad men, told the truth when it was dangerous, and your papa protected me," Clara added. "Made sure the truth could be heard. Like a princess and a knight." Hope's eyes were wide. "Better," Clara said. "Like two people who chose each other, chose what was right, even when it was hard." They told her an edited version, danger and courage, justice and love, the building of the life she knew. Hope listened raptly, seeing her parents with new eyes. That night, after Hope was asleep, Beckett found Clara on the porch, looking out at the mountains. "Any regrets?" he asked, echoing his question from years before. "How could I regret any path that led here?" She leaned into him. "Though I sometimes wonder what happened to all of them. Crow Dog, Brooks, even Thornton's men who escaped. The world's large. Paths diverge." Beckett was philosophical. "We chose ours." "Yes," Clara agreed. "We chose." A rider appeared at their gate. Young Deputy Collins with the evening report. All quiet, no troubles. It hadn't always been so, but they'd built something lasting here. Peace earned through courage, community forged in truth's fire. Later, as they prepared for bed, Clara showed Beckett her latest project. The journal she'd kept was being prepared for publication. Our story, a territory transformed, would tell their tale and others, showing how ordinary people could stand against corruption. "Think anyone will read it?" she asked. "Those who need hope will." He drew her close. "Those who need to know that love and justice can win." They stood together at their bedroom window, looking out at the town they'd helped save and shape. Somewhere in the distance, coyotes called to the moon. But here, in this house on Elm Street, a former marshal and a banker's daughter who'd become so much more had found their true calling, not just in law or finance, but in the daily work of building a world where their daughter could grow up free. The lamplight from their window cast a warm glow into the darkness, a beacon of the possible, and in her small bed, Hope Rourke dreamed of adventures, not knowing she was living in the middle of one, the greatest adventure of all, where love conquered fear and truth outlasted lies. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. It always did in the territory. But tonight, Beckett and Clara Rourke held each other close, grateful for the winding trail that had brought them from that jail cell in Fort Defiance to this moment of quiet triumph. They'd been tested by fire and emerged not just intact, but transformed. Two souls who'd found each other in darkness and chosen to build a life in the light. And that, more than any badge or bank, was their true victory. Proof that sometimes, against all odds, the good guys actually won. Thank you all for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope you enjoyed following Beckett and Clara's journey from that dusty jail cell to their happy ending in Cedar Falls. Where are you listening to this tale? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear from listeners whether you're on the ranch, on the trail, or just dreaming of the Old West. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more stories of love, adventure, and justice in the American frontier. Share your thoughts about Beckett and Clara's story. What was your favorite moment? Until next time, partners, keep riding toward that sunset.